Martin and John McClain, Hall of Fame writer, Houston Chronicle. So I had somebody send me a piece of the depth chart, or a video of I guess, a picture of the depth chart at Utah. Cam Rising, Quindon Jackson, who was, of course, Jaquindon Jackson, who was at Duncanville and then went to Texas, and now at Utah. And the first thing I thought about is Charlie Brewer's not even on the depth chart. And then come to find out, he has left the program. If he left because he was benched or also because he's no longer the starter, that's not the best look. But at the same time, we will try to track down, trying to work my angles of it if I can. But he was benched on Saturday night, and it hasn't gone well. And so Utah moves on, like Baylor's moved on with Gary Bohannon. And I guess, Paul, and I don't know if this means he still wants to play football. He still gets the red shirt because he's played a lot of football. We know the story about Charlie. But if he left because he's no longer the starter, I don't like that look, but I will always defend Charlie Brewer for the most part.
Well, I mentioned it yesterday. Craig mentioned the term bump card from wrestling. I think that everybody has a certain amount of hits in their body, and one of Charlie's last ones was that hit against Oklahoma in the 2019. He's not been the same since that hit in the 2019 Big 12 championship game. Everybody has that limit. I think he's past his limit. He's not a big guy, and he was not only hit, that was a big hit that changed him, because if you watch the way he just moved around at Georgia, he wasn't the same. And then last year he got nothing but punished behind a very bad offensive line a year ago. So I just didn't know how much he had left when he went to Utah, and this is not all that surprising to me, just based on how physically he must have been to me. And that's just my observation. I'm not a doctor. I didn't talk to anybody. That's just how it looked to me. Like, man, this guy's just taking too many hits.
Yeah, I mean, he took a lot of shots. And, at the same time, if there was a concern there, then, Utah's medical staff still cleared him to come play football there and start 3 games for them. So, I've heard all the stuff about hits and concussions and all of that. Would it surprise me in any way if he's had some of those? Absolutely not. I mean, we've all seen the hits that he's taken. But, at the same time, if it's that much of a concern, then I'm wondering how college staffs are clearing him to play.
I didn't think it was concussions. I think it was just your overall, just
damaged. I mean, and I totally get that. I have a hard time when I see people start getting uber specific, and I'm not talking about you, Paul. I'm saying in general, like, I've already seen multiple people like, see, it's this, and it's the concussions are adding up, and it's like, well, maybe it's just his whole body hurts. Maybe he's just maxed out what he can do. Like, that's the thing, is I think he maxed out what he could physically do. I mean, his arm's not going to get any stronger. He's not going to be able to run any better. His pocket presence isn't going to grow at this point. Like, he's who he is. And so we saw last year that Baylor's offense was a combination of problems. And as much as the O-line was the biggest issue, Charlie was also an issue. He was not very good last year. And, he also wasn't getting a whole lot of help either. Nobody on offense was good last year. Not even the running backs who are starring right now were very good last year. So I hate it for him. I do wonder if we're going to hear, that it was hey, I can't take any more shots, or I can't do this anymore. The grind's too much. I'm going to go coach, or I'm going to go be a lawyer, or whatever he's going to do. I await what he has to say and what his reasoning is, because on the flip side, if he just up and left because Cam Rising's now the starting quarterback, it's a bad look for Charlie Brewer. And it's the exact opposite of what college football should be heading towards. The transfer portal provides all these opportunities, but it's not there so that once you get benched, you just jump in the transfer portal to go get a starting job somewhere else. So that's why I'm curious to know the real reasoning behind his decision. Is it something of like, I just can't do this anymore? Or is it, you know what, I'm taking my ball and going home?
No, that's true. And that's exactly right. And so what I did, I reached out to Charlie. I reached out to Charlie's father, Robert, who I have a good relationship with both of them, and also others. Haven't heard anything, and probably it's kind of what's going on right now. Who knows what Robert Brewer actually knows about Charlie's decision to leave the team. But I'm not going to make any all I know is that if he doesn't play again, I'm okay with that. If he goes and tries to play somewhere else, he better, and they need to make sure that that's exactly what he wants to do, whatever level that might be, and whether it's a Power 5 team, which might not be available, I don't know. But if he left because he was benched and then now second team, I don't like that. He's too good to do that. But at the same time, maybe he's just done.
Well, there was another quarterback retirement today. Well, I don't know what Charlie's is, but there was another quarterback news today. It was Bailey Hockman, who was at FSU and then NC State and then Middle Tennessee. He left the program because he's done with football. And, I wouldn't be surprised if Charlie's done. I just wouldn't be surprised because and not that he's leaving his team, but if they told him, look, Cameron Rising is our quarterback the rest of this year, Jaquindon Jackson is a guy we want to get ready for the future. We need your reps to step back. And he's thinking, well, if I'm not going to play, do I need to put myself through all this? I'll just go and get out of the way.
Yeah, and I saw, and I don't know if this is connected at all, but, in light of today's news, you can kind of put two and two together, I guess. But there was a Utah player whose name escapes me who was talking about, just things in general. It was a clip, so it wasn't like there was a lot of, the question included in all of that. But he was talking about how Cam Rising has been the same guy throughout, that even when he wasn't the starter, he was still a guy creating a lot of energy on the sidelines and being vocal. And then once his number was called, like, hey, rip-roaring and ready to go. And I think we all know Charlie well enough to know that if he's not playing, he's probably not pumping you up on the sideline. He's not being very vocal. And, in fact, you might take it as pouting. I mean, just him walking around normally can look like pouting sometimes. So I don't know if that player was directly referencing Charlie, but it was said in a very positive light regarding Cam Rising. So I think Utah's probably got who they need to have back there. I think that showed toward the end of the game. I hate it for Charlie, especially because that first game was a good performance for him, and there were a lot of people at Utah or Utah fans that I saw that were like, hey, we finally got a guy. Like, we finally got our guy. And I remember thinking, well, let's see what, once the competition raises up a little bit. And sure enough, their offensive line can't block very well, and he's taking more hits, and then everything unravels from there. So I hate it for him. I'm not surprised, though, in the slightest that, he's been benched for Cam Rising. I am surprised that he's left the team, but wait for more word on exactly why that is.
Well, and it's actually trended on Twitter because obviously he was, for a couple of years, 2017 was a bad year all around with Baylor, and he was a part of that 1-11. They don't go to a bowl game without him in 2018. Matt Rule made that very clear. Jeff Nixon's made that clear, among others. And 19 was a great team with defense, a complementary offense of which Charlie was a part of it. And then, of course, eventually that kind of was able to wind down a little bit as well. And then that's when you had the Jacob Zeno appearance against Oklahoma. Charlie tried to play in the game against Georgia. He did, and he got slammed on the sideline on a tackle, and then he didn't play. So I don't know. I'm going to wait till I hear from him or maybe his father, if they talk to me. I don't know if they will. Before I find out exactly, we will have Jake Hatch, who covers Utah sports in a lot of ways. He'll join us in here in about 10 minutes or so to give us his. He is not, as of right now, in the transfer portal. That doesn't mean he can't be or won't be or maybe not by the end of the night. But I do know, at least for right now, not in the transfer portal.
I'll say this about Charlie. I mean, Baylor football probably doesn't have Dave Aranda as head coach if Charlie Brewer's not a Baylor quarterback the last few years. They definitely don't get into a Big 12 championship game against Oklahoma. They definitely are not probably as far along now as they may have eventually overcame, the setback of the scandal and all of that. But Charlie played a huge role in them doing so. Even though it wasn't always him, it was a lot of others, and a lot of times it was the defense. Charlie, brought them from behind so many different times and was a great player. My frustration with him was always like, why can't we see this for 4 quarters? Like, why is it always with 5 minutes left in the game, all of a sudden you turn into freaking Tom Brady? Where is that all the time? But, had to be a tough decision for him, I would imagine. And like I said, I'm sure we'll hear more. I'm not shocked he's been benched. I am shocked that he's leaving. But if it turns out that he's just calling it quits, then I think we'd all be very understanding of that.
Diane, listening to you guys from Phoenix this week, appreciate the measured discussion. R.E. Charlie, I hope he's assessing what's next rather than where next. That's from Diane. Tim also is talking about Charlie Brewer. Tom Brady would not have had any good looks behind that offensive line a year ago. There were no holes for running backs to run through. It was a real-life bad news Bears when they were on offense. Anyone who tries to blame Charlie for last year's ineptitude is wrong. Across the board, they were bad. That's from also from Tim. We appreciate that.
Grayson and I got a question today in the podcast about, Gary Bohannon and the fact that he didn't see a lot of time last year, and I forget the phrasing of the question, but good.
Yeah.
Thank God he didn't see time in this offense last year.
That's like, hey, why don't you go walk into that dungeon of snakes and then you get bitten by 30 or 40 of them. Then you go, hey, you want to go back in there again? It might have been Dave Aranda might have sacrificed, and I'm not saying this, sacrificed or what was best for Gary and Jacob and others by not playing them a year ago. Charlie eventually in the last game against Oklahoma State was done. And then that's when Jacob came in and got a few snaps.
Okay. Dave Aranda might have, and Charlie might have as well. Charlie was part of that. Charlie didn't want to sit down.
No.
So he knew. And then, look, if you're Baylor, you kind of maybe lucked out in that in the worst possible season you could have with offensive linemen and COVID and all that stuff, that you had a guy willing to stand back there and get pummeled and pummeled and pummeled and come back until that last week. That was a big thing because you could have broken Bohannon and Zeno permanently. There are quarterbacks who see ghosts. I always think about how talented I thought David Carr was. And the Texans just threw him out there behind a really bad offensive line, and you'd watch him, and they'd like, man, what was that about? And it's because he saw ghosts.
It's interesting you bring that up because Sam Darnold had said that when he was with the Jets, and Matt Rule in Carolina now have him. And Troy Aikman, I was told this yesterday, and I'll ask this if we ever get Coach Rule on. They have a Thursday game this week. They're 2-0. Did Troy Aikman tell him? I think Troy Aikman may have given Rule a little advice on the ghost part of it. That hey, there's more people that see those than maybe admit it. So that might also be why they also went after Sam Darnold, who of course has played well so far for them.